Okay, so Sid, let's rewind the clock about probably just over a year now.
Mm.
What were the series of moments that led to your trigger moment to starting your journey with us at RNT?
So the trigger moment actually takes us back even further than that, which is around 2020. So I know it seems like a long time ago, but if you think back to kind of just as the pandemic hit, right? So March 2020 in the UK, I actually caught COVID, right? So this is before any lockdown, any restrictions. I was one of the first few to kind of fall ill, and as I fell ill, um, I remember everything kind of shutting down around me, people getting rushed into hospital. Um, for me, it became a horrendous situation, and I think there were others that have gone through this journey. I think there's others that have been on the podcast who had a similar story, and I remember thinking to myself as I was struggling through it, like, have I given myself the best kind of possible chance, right? I don't know if having been in better health or having would have made any difference at all. But as you sort of sit there, you're recovering, being bedbound gives you a lot of time to reflect, right? It gives you a lot of time to
Yeah.
reflect on yourself. And I think the only thing that came to my mind was even if it didn't, even if my health was, I was in the best shape of my life, maybe it wouldn't have affected you. I would still call COVID. But did I really give myself a fighting chance, right? And hand on heart, I think I'd said, no, I really didn't. I'd gotten to the point where, you start examining yourself and thinking, oh, I've been an active social life, eating well, just the dad bod comes along slowly, and really every part of you start thinking, I've lost the control of my health. And I think that was probably the biggest trigger for me to say, well, should anything happen again, at least I want to know in my mind that I gave myself, my body, the best fighting
Mm.
chance that I possibly could have had.
And how did you feel mentally around that sort of scenario and that feeling when you were bedbound and struggling with COVID, but you felt you almost hadn't done yourself justice?
Mm. Well, initially you feel helpless, right? You feel helpless, you feel
Yeah.
lost, and you feel you start reflecting on all the bad decisions, I suppose. And that was the key to me, right? Were there times when I just had let go and stopped caring, and I think that's when you start, that's the feeling that I got. And that was the feeling of both disappointment and realization that I wasn't always like that. So it was a feeling of when did that start to change? When did I start feeling like actually it didn't really matter what my health was like? And in your mind, you start making those feel the justifications. Oh, maybe I was prioritizing my family. I'd become
Mm.
a dad a few years before that. So was I really prioritizing the right things? And you start to realize that actually without the health, people always say it, health comes first. You've got to look after yourself. But when you're busy and you start prioritizing other things, it starts to take lower and lower down the priority list. And that's when I kind of we realized that maybe it was just a false objection in my head. I wasn't really prioritizing the right things.
Mm. Okay, and then that was 2020. Um,
Mm.
what happened between 2020 and 2021?
Yeah, so that was an interesting one. So I started to recover, and I think it started to get real in my head. I've got to start doing things. Your doctors tell you, okay, you need to start using your lungs, and that the doctors had told me I'd lost 20% of my lung function, right, permanent and irreversible. So they were saying you've got to make the best use of the 80% that you've got. Get out there, start doing some work. And I was there starting to go for walks or do what I thought was right. And at the same time, because you sat there, you are scrolling through Instagram and Facebook, and you're trying to absorb what you can. And I guess I was coming across a huge swathe of information. Some of it great, some of it terrible, frankly. And I guess I was starting to come across those nuggets of information that started to make a bit of sense. So I started to go to the gym, I started to work out, I started to walk, starting to get information from social media and websites and things like that. And it became that feeling of I think I need some help here, right? If I really want to make this work, I need to get the experts in. There's only so much DIY you can do before you realize that if I really want to kind of refurbish the house, then I need the experts in to kind of coach me and tell me what's right and wrong. And that's probably where I stumbled. I don't know how, but across RNT and the journey started to go from there, I think.
And what was your, at that point, what was your biggest skepticism or concern before taking the final sort of leap? Because your lag between sort of the pandemic and the actual taking the action was a decent amount of time, right? So do you
Yeah,
have a
and
skepticism or?
oh, definitely. There's a huge skeptic in me, and maybe that's a healthy skepticism, because actually you probably shouldn't believe everything you see on social media, right?
Yeah.
You have, as someone who owns the program, moments to capture attention, so you have to have those kind of big ticket items on there, those transformations on there. So my skepticism was, they're probably not real, right? And which is probably true for a lot of folks out there who see kind of, oh, well, this is just a bodybuilder who's cut for 6 months and then suddenly showing a transformation. But it's the stories and the behind them, right? It was the stories when you think, oh, actually, hold on, this person is going through the same problems as me. This person has gone through similar issues, similar struggles. They look like me, right? They're close to home, some of them very literally. So that's when you start to think, well, actually, maybe there's something in it. And the skepticism started to fade when I realized that we weren't talking about the, get fit in 12 weeks kind of, abs for summer kind of program, which is initially what everybody wants, including myself. But actually, once having gone through what I went through, I was like, no, well, this is not what I want. I want to know if I can sustainably manage a better health for myself. So yeah, the skepticism was strong, I must admit. And I think having read through the stories, the bios, the transformation, I think that's where it started to feel like, okay, maybe there is something here.
What resonated with you specifically?
I'm trying to think back to some of the original stories, but it wasn't, when you see on Instagram, right, or Facebook, you see these two kinds of stories, I think, right? And it's usually someone who goes and just goes from kind of skinny to just incredibly jacked. And then you've got these people that are just like, oh, I've lost like, 50 kilos and I've got really, tons of weight. And I thought, well, I don't want to be a professional bodybuilder, and I don't want to be losing incredible amounts of weight, right? There's something in the middle here. And it was when I started to hear those stories of, actually these were parents and professional people that were just slowly transforming their life. And the photos that you saw was a checkpoint. That was just a point in their transformation. And actually, it was much more about how they changed as people and how their health got better. So it was those stories and those wins that really thought, okay, like I could do this. I think this is something for me.
And you said you're being bombarded by information in this time by all sorts of different fitness companies, and yeah, that's once you go down that rabbit hole and the algorithms picked up that you're interested in fitness.
I think it's what I just spoke about, right? It's those real stories, and at the time I didn't know what RNT really had to offer, right? In terms of how the process worked, that came later, but it was more about, there was already information. In fact, the idea that I could get a decent amount of information without even having to sign up felt like this company, the people that were behind it, had a purpose. There was a mission behind it, right? So before even signing up, I mean, you were kind of giving the game away anyway, right? And it's almost testament to show that it's not just about what you give away, it's about how you implement it, right? So I don't think anyone's going to be surprised when you say, well, you've got to get your nutrition strategy right. You've got to walk, keep that activity level high, work out, 3 to 4 times a week, drink water, sleep well. Like, I don't think that was a surprise to me, but it was well, how do I implement that? And I think the fact that was being given away, and I thought, well, actually, maybe I can engage in with these people, this company, they feel invested in getting the best out of their people. So I think there was definitely that drew me towards it.
It's funny you mentioned that. A couple of hours ago, I just had a meeting with a colleague, and he said to me, what was your mindset when you were writing some of the earlier content, when you first started RNT? I said, honestly, it was just how much can I give away,
Mhm.
and how much can I put on the website to give everyone literally the blueprint? Because I think everyone deserves to have that out there. Of course, there's an implementation factor, which is probably like where we kind of come in as a company, but
Mhm.
as an overall brand, I always wanted us to be an embodiment of the best education out there. So I'm really glad that you've mentioned that.
And I think there's probably people out there that can benefit from that, right? Because there's so much information. For myself, I think, like I said, it probably wasn't much of a surprise. Like you think, oh, I've got this, but I felt like it was like, imagine you're trying to learn to swim from reading a book, like, or
Mm,
learning to drive from reading a book. You could get, I'm sure, as much information as you want from that. There's so much content out there, but at some point, you've got to get behind the wheel, or you've got to get into the pool. Otherwise, you can't say I've learned to swim. And that's probably how I felt about, right. I probably have tried it. I've dipped my toe in the water. I've got tons of content here, but at some point, I've just got to dive in, right?
just got to lift the weight.
You just got to lift the weight.
So speaking of lifting the weight, when you first started, how did you? What were some of the challenges and wins early on that made the process effective, difficult? You know, what was the starting like for you? Because you know, we speak now, and you know, you're different, you look different, and you act different, and you're a very different
Mhm.
person to you were a year ago. But how did it start, and how did you find starting and making this big overhaul in your life?
Starting was rough, I would say, right? Because it seems simple, but in reality, it's a difficult process, and it's I guess, you know what, there's probably people listening to this who are starting their journey, right? And I guess the best analogy I can think of is um, like when you're going for a hike, right? And you see the mountain in the distance, and you know it's there, you can see it. And as you start walking towards it, you go, it just doesn't seem to be getting any closer, right? It just
Mm,
doesn't seem to get any closer. And you start thinking, right, what you don't need to do is don't confuse a clear day for a short distance. Right? And I think that's kind of what happened to me. When I started, it was the excitement you get of kind of, okay, I know what to do. You've given me the blueprint and here's what's happening. And then you realize, well, actually, I need to implement all of this and I need to keep going and I need to do it consistently and I need to do it every day, all the time. And it's, life starts getting in the way and, your systems break down sometimes. Um, so, if we think about the first few weeks, in fact, I think the first week I went on holiday, right? That was already booked before I'd even booked RNT. So I remember going, well, how do I even start this? How do I even think about exercise when I'm in a hotel room with a child? And how do I think about nutrition when I'm eating out every single day? And that was tough, right? It was really, really tough. But I think that's when having coaches as opposed to like a personal trainer, that's when that changed, right? Where people say, don't stress. We're going to show you what to do. We're going to tell you how to go about it, and then this is how you'll navigate it. So it was a tough start.
what were some of the strategies you used, either early on or as you've gone along when life gets in the way? Because something you hear me say a lot is, you know, life is always going to be in the way. There's never going to be a perfect time to your diary is never going to say to you, right, Sid, the next 12 months, just focus on your health and fitness. Yeah,
Mhm.
there's going to be various difficulties that show up. So just maybe talk about some of the different scenarios you've faced where life's got in the way, whether it's a crazy busy working schedule or travel, and how you manage to navigate it. So you at least make maintenance or some steps forward the case.
Yeah, I think there was a few things, right, where I started to kind of think about what did I want to achieve? What was that phase about for me? So if we think about that process phase, it was a lot to do with trying to um, optimize weight loss, right, or fat loss rather. So for me, there was some learnings that I had around making sure that my nutrition was absolutely on point, right? So if it meant that everything was really busy and I had to choose between skipping a gym session and doing some meal prep, then actually it meant do the meal prep, get that nutrition piece absolutely dead on correct, and if need be, you can find something else to do for exercise. And even when things got even busier, and I think, and I can't remember if it was Ed or Ivan who had said so, was ask yourself the question, what do you have control over in this period? Right? What is it that you've got control of? Because I'll think about those times where genuinely life got in the way. Like you had a sick kid, right? You've got a sick kid around you. Your priority suddenly becomes that, no matter what happens. But fine, you're not going to be able to leave the house and go to the gym, but certainly you've got control over what you can eat. Or if you you can attend the gym, but actually you're going to be on a business trip, well, actually do the thing that you have the control over. And then starting to think about where you can maximize that day, right? So getting your steps in. That became a big game changer for me, right? So I think we've all had Fitbits and wearables for years, and we've all been hammered home around trying to do 10,000 a day, but it didn't really mean as much to me as it did during this time, where it was much more about mental health. It was much more about getting outside. It was much more about feeling good. And little things came along where, starting to do meetings when you plug your headphones in and you start going for a walk. And the biggest one for me was the school run. We just started walking. We walk, drop off, and even on the way back, take a slightly different route around, which added about 1,000 steps extra a day. So actually, over the week, that was an extra 7,000 steps that I got in, which on some days, that could be potentially a day's worth of steps, just by going, rather than I took the slightly longer way round, and it only added an extra 15-20 minutes to my day. But it was those kinds of strategies that I was trying to find, not just in my day but throughout the week. Where can I find those small optimizations, right, to hit the big things?
When you were earlier on in the journey, and some of these habits may not be as obvious, when life gets in the way, it's very easy to revert back to the norm. In that moment when life gets in the way and something happens, a sick kid or busy trip, I know you mentioned, right, the mindset of you control what you control, and I 100% agree with it. But what about for someone who's thinking, well, I can't do this when that happens, or I can't do this when my work gets really busy? How do you avoid slipping back into the norm when you're caught up in that moment in itself, where it's like, oh my God, where health and fitness is it's not automatic for you at this stage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's two parts to that, really, isn't there? Because there's things that you are, when we talk about health and fitness, there's kind of things you do and things you don't do, right? So for example, it's when we talk about eating, it's about what you do and what you don't do. When we talk about training, it's what you do and what you don't do. And there's just it's adding in those questions that you ask yourself. So I think for the nutrition part of things, when life was getting in the way, if you start to revert back, it always became that question of, does this enhance my experience right now? So if I haven't meal prepped, so I'm gonna put some quick, whip something together, eat something like that. Or sometimes you have to, I'm gonna, yeah, fine, I'll eat what you're eating. Well, is that gonna help me? Is that gonna enhance my experience of whatever is happening in the moment? And those kinds of sort of self-reflections were the really key piece to me, right? The training bit was hard, because there were times, and it happened to me quite often, where I was trying to, we were trying to progress all the time, right? When we're training, you have a goal, you have a target, and you try and progress. But there were times when I didn't have the equipment, or I wasn't going to the gym. So I thought, well, if I can't train, maybe I'll exercise, and maybe that's the next best thing, because I didn't have a target, but I am going to do something active, because that can work. So those were sort of the ways I started thinking about things differently, especially in those early days.
Awesome. So you've started the program, you've started picking up some momentum, you're making good progress. Then you get to the point where you've got a checkpoint in sights, which I think for you came in April this year. So around January times, things started getting closer to that. How did you approach the final stage of the checkpoint? And then we'll touch on consolidation and sort of early investment. But how did you find getting from okay into really good condition for your photo shoot earlier this year?
There was a real trigger point that happened, and I was probably struggling, right? Kind of, if you think about it, January, you're kind of going through that kind of, you've seen through Diwali, you're going into Christmas, you come out of that, and even just maintaining it at that point was tough enough, right? And I was meant to be trying to get into photo shoot condition, and it just it wasn't going anywhere, right? Like I was not going in the direction or the momentum that I'd hoped. And I remember it was either a podcast or a short post on Instagram or something, and it was Ivan, I believe, and it was a short conversation that you'd had on a previous podcast, and you were talking about during that period, the approach that you take is not meant to be sustainable. That it's just not, right. It's a means to an end, and as long as you can understand that, that's fine. But you're not meant to be sustaining this, and this is just a way for you to get, show what you're capable of, really push yourself as hard as you can. And that probably didn't occur to me, because up till that point, we were still trying to build those habits. We're trying to build the structure. We're trying to build the system. But coming up to that photo shoot condition, it was slightly different. So once that trigger point happened, and saying, actually, this isn't what I'm going to do for the next 30, 40, 50 years of my life, right? I'm not going to be weighing out egg whites and things like that. Like it's going to be very different. So I think that to me started changing. So it just started to have a really clear goal in sight, knowing that it's okay to be a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's okay to push yourself a little bit harder. And as soon as that happened, things started changing very quickly.
Yeah, it's one of those things where that grind period is such a short period, but so intense. But at the same time, like you said, it's not a sustainable period. But once you know it's not a sustainable period, anyone can commit to something really, really hard for 4 to 6 weeks. And that's ultimately what it is, isn't it? Just to get you over the line. Because you just can't get away with anything in that time. But it's only 4 to 6 weeks.
Exactly. And once that clicked in my head, the second challenge came along, right? Which was bringing people on the journey with me, right? Because I think maybe we haven't touched on that yet. That was certainly a big thing for me, where, that would have been October to January. You're about 3 or 4 months into the journey. You start to physically change a little bit. People start to notice, but not just your physical appearance, but your habits. So you're no longer participating in meals. Your social life starts to become a bit withdrawn. You go to your parents' house and you're suddenly not eating, and that becomes a big deal. So having the conversation to say, look, I'm going to be here, I'm going to participate, but you know what, I'm going to bring my own lunch, or I'm going to not eat with you, or I'm going to have to skip this or I'll come later because I'm training that morning. Those types of conversations started to help, because you knew you had a clear goal, and you had to prioritize all of those elements if you want to get there.
What was some of the reaction from the inner circle, your immediate family? Were they supportive? Did you have to persuade them on the journey? Did they help you?
So I think the absolute immediate. So for example, if my wife, I think I had that conversation with her prior to even signing up, right? Because I think I'd seen that this required commitment, and in my mind, that was my intention. Whether I was going to execute on it or not, and it was all going to be dependent on if I had that support. So that was very clear. I had the support, throughout that journey. But as you start to kind of bring kind of your parents, your siblings, and your close friends into it, initially it starts to be a bit sort of grating. I think I probably got a skeptical few looks, or a few kind of, well, why do you want to do this, or can't you just do it this once, or it's my birthday, that kind of those kinds of questions. But when they actually see that you're being consistent, you're committed to it, and I think at that point they became very supportive. And you start to think that really not many people outside of that really care, right? Like they don't pay that much attention to what you're doing. I think someone had said it really nicely, where they said, You know, you're just an extra in someone else's movie, right? You're just, no one else is paying that much attention to you. So concentrate on your own movie and you'll be all right. So yeah.
I really like that analogy. It's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a useful way to reframe things. And then let's go into the grind now. What sort of things did you learn about yourself?
I think you start learning about the limits you're willing to push yourself, right? And I think as I start to think about even the final few weeks of coming up to that photo shoot, I knew it was just a checkpoint, but that's when I needed to make sure kind of every single thing was optimized, right? Because actually any of those things that started to become out of check would actually compounded to have a bigger effect. So you start to learn, self-control, discipline, and I think discipline is kind of underrated, right? It became much more of a, can I do this every day now, no matter what else happens, will I wake up at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning to get steps in? Will I make sure I train? Will I make sure that regardless of what's happening, I'll eat exactly what I've planned out for myself, right? And do it willingly, do it not begrudgingly because I have to, but because I get to be in the best condition of my life. And that it becomes a really dig deep moment, right? I never thought that I never thought it would feel like that, right? I always thought it was just going to be those kind of sweaty Peloton moments, or kind of, like that Rocky moment where you're just kind of in that montage period, right? And I just wanted that music to play. But that's not really how it feels like. It's just more of a, you really do have to dig deep. You really do have to kind of want it in that period, because at that point, all you can dream about is eating ice cream, and all you can dream about is just laying in bed rather than walking out in the rain. And really, it feels like, do you want this? Do you really, really want to see how far you can push yourself? And
it's one of those things where if you to say that to someone at the start, it's either going to go one or two ways. Someone's going to be like, yeah, I'm all over that, or maybe like, oh, that's not me. Until you get some of that early momentum, which is why I think it's so important to have that early momentum, so you can then explore what's possible in this. Because I think some of the earliest life-changing moments of this experience is when you finally realize how much you can do. Then you've got to translate it into other areas of your life post checkpoint. But I think in the grind period, it's the first time probably you've said no to food in various scenarios. You've put some boundaries around food. You've gone out walking in the rain just to get the job done. And you've probably said no to a few people that you wouldn't normally say no to. And it's the first time in many cases in our lives that we've done it. And I think that's a very liberating experience.
And it's a strange feeling when you're doing it for what feels like kind of a holistic part of your life. But if you were to take that exact scenario and did it to like running a marathon, people might train for 6 months for a marathon and optimize exactly what they're doing and run incredible amounts. And up to race day, say, I can't do this, and I can only eat this, I'm carb loading. You're doing it for one day, you're doing it for that one point to do as well as you can. But actually, everyone's okay with that. And when you start saying, well, most of you have tried that, and you're not expecting to run 26 miles to work every day, it's just so that afterwards you've probably learned something about yourself, and you do better things having learned that. So I'm hoping that when I take that example to people kind of go, oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's like work as well. People will work 60, 78 hours a week and no one's batting an eyelid, right? It's like, oh, right, that's great. You're smashing it at work. That's the automatic assumption. I remember hearing this analogy the other day about workaholism and just the status around working a lot. And they're saying no one will bat an eyelid if someone's working 8 hours a week. But if you're doing 5 grams of Coke on the weekend, people are going to think something's wrong with you. And the idea was that if you're addicted to work, there's no issue. If you're addicted to drugs, there's a massive issue. They're both having the same sort of chemical effect in your body, but it's probably the same here as well. If you're someone who suddenly starts saying no to eating junk food and starting saying yes to long walks and regimental exercise, suddenly there's what's this guy doing?
Yeah, it was actually towards that checkpoint, and even after the checkpoint, something strange happens when you start speaking to people, and you get into these interesting conversations where some people really kind of like, come up to you close and whisper, like, how did you do it? Like, how did you, I've been thinking about this, and the truth is very boring to them, because actually it's not, there is no magic pill and there's no magic diet to it. And the other one is when people start reflecting kind of their own
insecurities.
Totally, right. It's like, oh, I could have done that. Why? But they start telling you their excuses of why they're not doing it, and you feel like, none of this is for you, right? This is all for me, and it's being okay with being that slightly kind of selfish moment for it, right?
Yeah, you hear people talk about how busy their lives are or how they've got all these things going on. It's just a better way to make themselves feel better about whatever the thing is. Like and the ironic thing is you probably never even said anything to anyone. They're just telling you what are the reasons why.
Not a single thing, yeah.
So you talked about the checkpoint and the grind. Talk about consolidation, because this is obviously a massive part of what we focus on at RNT. I talk a lot internally with you guys around, death by 1,000 cuts and avoiding the rebound. And just to get some context on that, the rebound it's a bit more obvious, but death by 1,000 cuts is where you've been so good for so long, but then suddenly one dark chocolate square turns into two, turns into a bar, one glass of red wine a week turns into a bottle every other day. It can very easily revert back to the norm. So how have you found that experience so far of effectively life with no real fitness goal?
Mm-hmm.
So to speak, or no photo shoot or no excitement
yeah, it's I think it starts off okay, and then I definitely felt that kind of feeling of being a little bit lost, right? You don't have that goal, and you also have a little bit of freedom, right? Suddenly you've got more more choices in what you eat, and a bit more feeling like you can enjoy a little bit of a social life again. So there's definitely been moments where I've gone, oh crap, was that just me being old me again and having gone crazy? But it was that trying to put together everything that you've learned, or I've learned in the past anyway. So yes, fine. Have I enjoyed a night out with my friends? Have I gone out for a meal? Lovely. Have I then turned that into a binge eating week and just gone crazy the whole week, the whole month? No, right. And I think that those are the times when you think, whilst I don't need to continuously meal prep, well, actually, most of my meals are pretty the same anyway, right? Like I eat the same breakfast and most people do anyway, eat the same breakfast every day anyway. So why not make that the same breakfast at lunch? And actually things start to get a bit easier with the rest of your meal. So yeah, I've certainly found it okay. I'm still making sure that there's still a potential for a rebound, I think. So it's just making sure that I've become, I think, aware and accountable is probably the nice way to think about it, right? So I can acknowledge when things are going wrong and recognize them a lot better, and just feel like, well, actually, now how can I make sure I kind of put back on a path so I can still feel like, I think you talk about it, the feel, look, and perform as well as I can, right?
Yeah, you want to try and find that sweet spot, which it's not the same as you were when you're on photo shoot day, and that's another thing that can often be a little bit difficult to accept, in that you're not going to walk around as you do in those pictures year round, because it's not really a sustainable place to be. But there is a sustainable opportunity, potentially 5 to 10% above where that is, depending on where you are on that day.
Absolutely. And I think how you feel on photo shoot day, I think, is probably about 80% adrenaline, right? That's why you probably feel great on that day.
Yeah.
But in reality, I don't think I was feeling as good as I probably did maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, when I suddenly started feeling like my energy was suddenly spiking up, and I was, I was lifting a lot more, and I was suddenly feeling just great about myself overall, whilst looking probably not as ripped as I did on the day. So yeah, I certainly feel, I still fit into the same clothes, but I'm not kind of visibly as lean as I was, and I think it's just kind of getting used to that as well, right, mentally.
So you talked about there being no magic pill to achieving results in what we do, but what about the process have you found to be highly effective with RNT specifically?
There are probably 3 or 4 things that are that are unique, perhaps to RNT, or at least effective for me. I think the first one was having the right kind of coaching team behind you, right? That was probably one of the skepticisms I had initially, right? Like, actually, you guys are all behind a computer elsewhere. I never get to see you. How does that even work? For someone who'd never approached online training before. So I think when I started to realize that actually this is a team that's there for me whenever I need them. I can post, I can email, I can contact you guys, and I'll get a response back, as opposed to a personal trainer, right? I've had good ones, I've had bad ones. Bad ones just giving you terrible advice, and good ones who are glorified rep counters, I suppose, in real life. So having that team and actually having a multitude of skills behind them, I think that was pretty clear. That was very useful. I think the second piece was having other people go on that journey with you, right? So I think you talk a lot about community, speaking with others in the cohort, and especially initially, having those people go through that, sharing those problems, learning from each other was very, very important. And hopefully sharing mine as well was helpful. But you went from feeling like, well, everybody's online, you don't get to speak to them, to suddenly feel like, well, actually, there's tons of people going through this process with me. So I think that was really key for me as well. So I'd say those are the 2 most important ones. I think on top of that, I think the fact that the content was continuing to come out, so there's always something new to listen to, something new to read, but also that was stored in a kind of a curriculum fashion. So actually, you start not only to learn, and I'm going to use that driving analogy again, is I got that sense of you wanted to teach people to get to a particular stage, so that ultimately, if they turn around to you and says, Akash, I don't need you anymore, I feel really great, and I feel like I can tackle the world on my own, you're kind of going, great, that's what we want from you. And that felt like, again, a kind of a mission that you can get behind, and going, actually, this is a team that wants to teach me to become as independent as I can on my journey. So those are the key bits that worked for me.
Amazing. Now that you're looking forward for the next year, what are some of the key things you're working towards with us at RNT now? How does the next year unfold? We've identified there's no like tangible, clear goal, but what are you trying to really crack now?
So I still think that there's a lot to be gained from just this consolidation phase, right? Just to kind of make sure that I can maintain those good habits is right now a good goal for me. I think as I move forward, it's more about how do I turn kind of that repetitive way that I've been learning about nutrition and training into what feels like intuitive, intuitive eating, intuitive training, that kind of thing. So I think that's the transition I'd like to make. And I guess what I've realized, it's like anything, right? You just have to practice something over and over again, and that's when it starts to feel intuitive. Yeah. So that's kind of the goal for me at the moment, is to kind of transition to that piece. I don't know if I'm going to go into that kind of incredible muscle building phase. Perhaps I think that might come, but for now I'm kind of happy in that piece, because it's keeping me in that sweet spot quite nicely.
Yeah, when people talk about intuitive eating at the start of a journey, all they're really doing is guessing and probably failing. The reality is it only comes with experience. It takes a long time to crack that, but it's probably the most liberating skill to acquire as a human, is being able to intuitively eat again, which is effectively probably how we were designed to be anyway. But for various reasons, we've kind of lost that ability to intuitively eat.
Yeah, and I think it's either, depending on the perspective, it's either motivating or kind of demotivating. But I'm a year into this journey and I'm still learning that, right? I don't think I even a year into it, I'm saying, I can do it now. Actually, I'm learning, I'm making some mistakes, I'm kind of tracking it back and thinking, okay, well, that I got that wrong. But actually, it's fun to know that there's still a lot to learn just by making kind of small tweaks and measuring out your food again, things like that.
Yeah, amazing. How's the physical being the vehicle for you, Sid?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, actually. I think that about how my mindset has changed so much, right? By pushing your body. So going from when I started this journey, I was about 80 plus kilos in weight. I was, probably thinking about training, or, the once a week gym goer probably. And now going to a point where those things, having pushed my body a lot more, has helped me understand things like, well, what do I want to prioritize in my life? What are the most important things that I want moving forward? How do I want to feel 10 years from now will probably dictate what I do today. Because everybody who starts this, I'm sure, says, I wish I'd done this 10 years ago. I wish I did this a while ago. So if I'm thinking about that now, then I need to start thinking about what does 50-year-old Sid wishes he did, because then I've got the opportunity to do it now. I've got the opportunity to do it today. Right?
What are some of the things that come to you in that therapy session with your 50-year-old? Because I do a lot as well. I do a lot of that as well, by the way. I think
Yeah.
about from like an 80-year-old perspective. What would 80-year-old Akash tell me right now?
And honestly, I just feel like keeping yourself as healthy as possible, right? Like keep yourself active. You want to do things like I feel like the old Asian guy talking. You want to dance at your kids' weddings, and you want to do those types of. You want to live your life through those experiences, and you don't want to feel like actually I wasn't able to do that because in my 40s I just ruined my body, or I didn't think about it enough, or I didn't train hard enough. So for me, if I can continue to do what I do today, 10 years down the line, I'll be in good. And you know what, you've seen plenty of folks on the journey, including your dad, right? Like who've really transformed themselves. So it's not like it's not possible, but actually it's completely doable if you do it right. So yeah, I think quality. If I want quality time in the future with my son, with my family, then I think it's just about continuing on this healthy journey. Continue to push myself.
It's funny. I asked my dad earlier this year, "What's your biggest regret in life so far?" He said to me, "I wish there was RNT 30 years ago. So my life would have been very different in every aspect." So it's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah,
And he's
and it's
60. Yeah, yeah.
is he 60?
But he's 62 now. So I asked him at 62. So.
And I think he's a really great example of someone who goes with kind of taking on a new mentality and a new mindset. So learning from kind of what we're doing today, right? So what you're doing today. And I get that with whether it's with my parents or with folks that perhaps have been ingrained in a particular way of thinking, but actually watching you and doing you do something different kind of starts to pique a bit of curiosity in them, and hopefully even changes, even if it's a few habits of walking a bit more, watching how they eat, but also ultimately having the same goal of, right, well, you're 70 now, how do you want to feel when you're 80? Because you could do that today, right?
What would you say to someone who's about to start their journey or early on in the process right now, as the best piece of advice to make it as much of a success as possible?
Let go, because this isn't even about learning. I think this is a lot about unlearning, right? You need to figure out all of the things that have brought you to sign up today, right? And whilst it feels like you're learning a lot, it's about unlearning some of those habits that you've got, unlearning and letting go around those what you think is going to be the right approach to things. Because once you've learned to let go, then you can start to absorb, you can start to learn, and if you start to trust that process, the change you'll find in yourself, is going to be incredible. So your future self, if you're in day one, then year one you is going to thank you for doing that. So let go.
I love it. And final question, Sid, what almost kept you from starting this?
What almost kept me from starting the journey? I think it was thinking it wasn't real. Okay, right. I honestly didn't think some of the some of the transformations were real. I just couldn't get my head around it. I think we've touched on a lot of that today. So thinking
Yeah.
it wasn't real, thinking that this is going to be some kind of online coaching scam that I'm just going to have to. I'll be on BBC Crime Watch talking about later, like,
Oh,
I'm
wow.
giving my money to someone. But like, I didn't know. I just didn't know what I was
Yeah.
letting myself in for.
Well,
So
that's
I
not a
think,
good statement on the fitness industry.
right, like you feel like you're just going to be sent some, like, you're going to pay some money, someone's going to send you a PDF, and right, someone's going to WhatsApp you every couple of weeks on how you're doing. Like, I just didn't know what I was letting myself in for. So there was probably a bit of fear ingrained there. And I think it was just having tons of those testimonials, those people who are all kind of all driven in the same way, I think made you feel like, actually I want to be part of this. So what almost kept me from joining was probably just the fear in myself. I don't think it was probably just me projecting my own insecurities, in all honesty. So I think, yeah, that was probably the biggest barrier to myself.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story, Sid. Appreciate you being so honest. And I think a lot of people are going to be inspired by what they've heard today.
Not at all. Thanks very much, Akash.